Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina. I'm head of our future innovation team here at Avon. It's my job to talk to women and do research and come up with new product ideas for Avon and launch new brands. And I'm really excited to be able to do this in these interesting times. I'm actually calling from Miami, Florida. And I'm able to talk here with an expert, Dr. Sarah Jarvis, who I'd love to introduce you to in a minute, who's in London. And we're here today to talk about perimenopause and menopause, which is what the Adapt brand is about. And we've got a series of questions from our community of women that we've been, asking, and we'd really like to invite Dr. Sarah Jarvis, who is an expert in this field, to help us answer some of the questions that you have. And I'd love to introduce Dr. Sarah Jarvis and just ask you to, tell us a bit about yourself and your experience with perimenopause and menopause.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you. My name's Sarah and I'm a menopausal woman. So I am also, obviously, a GP, but I went through the menopause a few years ago. Mine was relatively easy. Well, I think that my husband might disagree, but I'm also a mother. I've been a GP for over 30 years and I've wanted to be a GP since I was 8 years old. When I first became a GP, I was very involved with the Royal College of GPs, and I was a founder member and then chair of the Women's Task Force at the Royal College of GPs. Now that all started because we sent out a questionnaire to young members of the college under 40s and asked them about several things, including the biggest barrier they had to fulfilling their career. Interestingly, balancing home and work was the single most commonly cited problem for women, and not one of the men who answered our questionnaire said anything about it. So things have moved on. Things have got a lot more equal since that time, and we have broken a lot of taboos. But from my perspective, I think really menopause is one of the last remaining taboos, and that's really not helped by the sensationalist headlines that we've had about HRT, for instance, in the last 2 decades. I'm also a broadcaster for the BBC, and I've edited several books, including A Younger Woman's DIY Guide to Health. I wanted to call it a girly guide, but they wouldn't let me. Pregnancy for Dummies and Women's Health for Life.
I completely agree with you. This is an incredible topic. We do need to talk about it. And, we're so proud to have 5 million representatives around the world that can help us make this conversation more accessible to everybody. And I think it's just about talking about it and offering support and, empathy and education to our community wherever we can. So I have a lot of questions here that I'd love to go through with you. And the first one is, what is the difference between perimenopause and menopause? It'd be great if you could explain a little bit about that. A lot of the women we spoke to had never even heard of the term perimenopause. So anything you can do to help demystify that would be great.
So the menopause officially refers to when your body stops ovulating. In other words, when it stops producing eggs. An egg, usually one every month. Now, officially, you reach the menopause when you've had your last period. And the word comes from the Greek, the ancient Greek, menos, pausos. Pause, pausing, stopping, menos, monthly. So you're no longer having monthly periods. Actually, you won't have had them for a while, at least not every month. But the point is that by the time you get to the menopause and have your last period, your periods probably will have been irregular for a while. So you may well not know that actually it is your last period. In fact, it's only when you haven't had periods for a year that your doctor will say that you have definitely gone through the menopause. But the perimenopause is the period, the process that leads up to that change as your body starts to go through those huge changes in your hormone balance that happen around about that time. Now, lots of women will get some symptoms, but it's often much, much earlier than they expect them to, because they think, oh, I'm not menopausal yet. I'm not at an age to be menopausal. I'm still having periods, all right? They're a bit more erratic. But they're often unaware that there is such a thing as the perimenopause. And in the years that lead up to the menopause, the number of follicles, the number of eggs that you have starts to dwindle. And those female hormones that are produced by your ovary play a major part in controlling that natural ebb and flow of hormones that results in periods. So it's not a one-off process. You don't go on completely normally and then suddenly menopause, day one, stop. It's a gradual process, and those symptoms of the perimenopause can last for years.
Thank you for that. And I think it's a really important, to make those distinctions. A lot of questions we have, though, is around ages. At what sort of age do you think you can experience these phases?
Well, of course, there's an average age to go through the menopause, which is 51.5 years old, to be precise. But anything over the age of 45, as far as I'm concerned as a doctor, is perfectly normal. And that's, of course, the day you have your last period. If you have your last period between 40 and 45, we describe it as an early menopause. And if you go through it before the age of 40, it's described as a premature menopause. And that's where doctors are really going to be keen to make sure that you have treatment, for instance, particularly to protect your bones. The perimenopause can start a few years before that. So frankly, any time from your early 40s is common because it tends to last between about 3 and 5 years, although for most women, it's closer to 5 years than 3.
Thank you so much. I think that's very clear. And I think, not only had we spoken to women who'd never heard about the term perimenopause, we actually did a survey where 46% of women said they weren't even prepared. So I know you mentioned a little bit about, some of the ages, and I think, a lot of people will find it surprising that, it can happen as early as you stated. Can you help share some of the symptoms that, women should be looking out for to really understand whether or not they could be perimenopausal?
Well, in the perimenopause, you're still going to be having periods, although, as I've said, those periods are likely to start to become a little bit more erratic. Most women have heard about hot flushes, night sweats, vaginal dryness for the menopause, but they have no idea that those symptoms can actually start years before their last period, and very few of them are aware that there are lots more symptoms. So along with those 3 classical ones, you've got mood changes, anxiety, depression, palpitations, headache, problems concentrating, tiredness, changes to your skin, changes to your hair. Your hair can get thinner, your skin can get dry and itchy, you can get more wrinkles, sadly, and unfortunately your sex drive can go through the floor. So between about maybe 3 to 7 out of 10 women get hot flushes in the early stages of the perimenopause. And unfortunately, the longer you have between starting those hot flushes and having your last period, the longer they're likely to last. Now, in the past, we used to say that women got hot flushes for a couple of years around about the time of their last period. But actually, we now know it's not unusual for women to have hot flushes for a decade, I'm afraid. And the average is about 7 years. Hot flushes and night sweats tend to go hand in hand. Most women will get a combination of both. I didn't get any hot flushes actually, but I got a lot of night sweats. And that, of course, also increases the chance of sleep disturbance. But of course, many women will have found that their sleep pattern changes in their 40s anyway, even if they haven't got hot flushes. So it's a mixed bag. It's very variable from woman to woman, but most women will get some, at least, of those symptoms.
Yeah, it's really surprising just how many different types of symptoms. And I think, it's recognizing that everyone's journey is different, right? Not everybody will get all the same symptoms. A lot of the questions we had was around the tiredness piece. Could you talk a little bit about the feelings of being tired and how they can be kind of addressed?
Tiredness is a real issue round about the menopause. And of course, there's lots going on in women's lives at that stage. We used to wonder whether it was because there was so much else going on, but now we know that the menopause itself can have a really significant impact on your energy levels. But there are lots of things that you can do to improve that. So one of the most important is exercise. It sounds really strange because the last thing you want to do when you're exhausted is to exercise. But interestingly, regular exercise is really effective for lots of kinds of tiredness, including, would you believe, tiredness related to cancer and cancer treatments. So regular exercise, because it produces endorphins, which are your body's natural feel-good hormone, can boost your energy levels. Important to try and avoid alcohol because that can hugely disrupt your sleep. People think of alcohol as something that helps them get sleep. In fact, it means the quality of your sleep is worse. So not only are you likely to wake earlier, you'll wake feeling less rested. You might want to avoid caffeine, especially late in the afternoon or evening. It can give you a brief lift and is good for raising alertness levels. But if you have it too late in the day, particularly if you're sensitive to caffeine, and quite a lot of women are, you can find it disrupts your sleep. Your diet really important. So veg, fruit. People always talk about fruit and veg. I like to talk about veg and fruit, because actually we'd much rather you were eating more of the veg and less of the fruit. Fruit's still good, but the veg are even gooder, as it were, and eat a rainbow of that, along with plenty of lean protein. Really important to try and avoid refined carbohydrates and processed foods, starchy, sugary foods. The reason for that is that they very rapidly raise your blood sugar. Now, that may give you a very brief boost, but then your sugar levels come plummeting down and you get that really flat feeling, so you can get a huge drop. Relaxation, very important. Stress reduction. Exercises to do with that, or mindfulness, can really help. They can, interestingly, they can actually help menopausal symptoms, including hot flushes and tiredness as well. Then, of course, there's sleep. So do keep your bedroom cooler. Very important. I have learned I have 3 different layers. I have a duvet, which goes on for about 2 minutes. Then I have a duvet cover, no duvet inside it, which is the middle of the night. And then when I wake up, I've got the sheet, which is all I need, even in the middle of winter, quite a lot of time. So make sure you've got layers of bedclothes and keep your room nice and cool, nice and dark. It's also a good idea to get into the habit of going to bed and getting up at about the same time.
So, Dr. Jarvis, you've talked a lot about, diet and refined carbs. Can you give some examples of what refined carbs are, so that, people know what to choose and what foods to kind of avoid?
I'm sure a lot of people have seen the book called Pure, White and Deadly, which refers to, of course, table sugar. And basically, the whiter a carb is on the whole, the more refined it is. So there are 2 main kinds of carbs: starchy and sugary. So sugary carbohydrates are the ones that we think of as being sugary. And of course, don't forget, there is actually sugar inside fruit, for instance, although it's all tied up with that fiber and micronutrients, all those good things. So in that respect, it's much less unhealthy. Refined means everything has been stripped away. So it's just the carbohydrate itself. So for instance, white bread, white pasta, those are refined carbohydrates. Whereas complex carbohydrates are things like wholemeal and whole grain foods. And indeed, even potato with its skin, for instance, to an extent, is a complex carbohydrate, but mostly it's whole grain and wholemeal. Those are very, very different to white, the processed carbs, whether they be sugary or starchy.
You touched on a very good point, and I love what you said about veg and fruit. Actually, I might use that with my children as well. But it's another big area of kind of questions that we were getting from our community is the weight gain. This strange, inexplicable weight gain that happens during this time that feels different to other times. And I think what you said about the kind of diet and mindfulness around eating is going to be really important. But is there anything you can share around perhaps why that happens during this time?
It's the eternal question. And unfortunately, I am no exception. I found it much harder to maintain my weight as I've got to more mature, shall we say. It's not all down to hormones, although hormones can lead to a real shift of weight gain at different bits of your body. So whereas in the past you might have tended to put on weight on your thighs, on your bottom, now you're much more likely to put on weight on your tummy. So what we call belly fat or tummy fat. And unfortunately, that kind of fat is particularly damaging in terms of increasing your risk of type 2 diabetes, increasing your risk of heart disease. It's also going to make your waistbands quite a lot tighter in many cases, even if you manage to maintain the same weight. As you get older also, your muscle mass tends to drop, and that tends to drop your metabolic rate, which is the rate at which your body ticks over. So that can make it harder to keep that weight off. Now, there are things you can do. Obviously, reducing your calorie intake can make a difference, and boosting your exercise. Exercise is so important, not just for burning calories, not just for your heart, not just for your lungs, but over 50s in particular, we recommend that you use muscle strengthening exercises. So exercises that exercise different bits of your body, because actually your muscles need building. And if you can build your muscles, you'll maintain strong muscles, your metabolic rate will increase, but it will also make you less prone to falls later in life. And very importantly, particularly after the menopause, weight-bearing exercise, because unfortunately another disadvantage of the menopause is after the menopause you're much more prone to losing bone, osteoporosis, or thinning of the bone, and weight-bearing exercise is really good for preventing that. Now basically pretty much any kind of aerobic exercise is weight bearing, apart from swimming. Swimming's great for other things. It's great if you've got arthritis, it's great for your heart, but it's not good in terms of bones, and cycling isn't a lot of good either. Then in terms of your diet, well, refined carbs, we're back to that idea, avoid the refined carbs. Do increase the plant-based diet, do increase the amount of veg and fruit again, increase the calcium in your diet, very important again for your bones. Lean meat, so protein helps with bones, and once again, I'm afraid, limit that alcohol.
I really like what you said about the exercise as well, because I think the other thing that it helps with is the whole stress levels. So
Yeah.
You talked earlier about the emotional side of things, and I really find exercise can be hugely powerful in giving you that alone time, and giving you that time to think and relax and de-stress, because I think it's also really important that we take care of ourselves and our mental well-being as well.
Amen to that.
Absolutely. Another question that I think is also on everyone's mind, and in particular with the range that we've developed, is skincare concerns.
Your skin is hugely sensitive to hormones. Anyone who has been through the misery of teenage acne knows that. So when you're a teenager, most of that acne is down to an increased activity in something called your sebaceous glands. Now, these glands are really important because they provide moisture, moisturize your skin, natural moisturizing. But unfortunately, if they produce too much of those natural oils, then they can block the pores, and that's when you get acne. The oil itself is very useful, but has a horrible name. It's called sebum. Now, they're very sensitive, of course, your glands, to androgens, that's testosterone. Most people believe, of course, that only men have got testosterone, but in fact, women have testosterone too. And at puberty, you get lots of testosterone. That's why the oily skin. Women have about maybe 1/10 of the levels of testosterone of men, but that very often drops after the menopause. Interestingly, if you have a condition called polycystic ovary syndrome, where you will often get irregular periods and acne and excess body hair, that's largely because your body is producing too much in the way of androgens as well. So estrogen can have an effect on sebum, but in particular, it seems to increase collagen. And collagen is what keeps your skin thick and bouncy, as well as hydrating your skin. So collagen can drop by about 30% in the first 5 years of your menopause. And unfortunately, that may well be why you end up with all those problems with skin getting drier as you get older. Then there's the fluctuating level of collagen, of estrogen rather. So fluctuating levels of estrogen around the perimenopause, that's partly what accounts for the hot flushes, but it can also lead to dry skin, itchy, sensitive skin. You can get, unfortunately, a return to teenage acne because the ratio of testosterone to estrogen changes. And of course, sagging and wrinkling.
We've talked a lot about food, Dr. Jarvis, and there's a lot of questions around supplements. What would your advice be around, the selection of supplements that people should take during this time?
There are a whole load of supplements that women can consider. There are lots of things out there as alternatives to HRT, or in addition to food that you might be having, whether that's soya in your diet or whatever. But I would certainly go, if possible, for a so-called traditional herbal remedy logo. That's in the UK, or the equivalent. So speak to your pharmacist about how you can know that any complementary medicine you have has been manufactured safely. In the UK, we have something called NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and they look at all the evidence, and they're pretty reliable in terms of what they recommend. And they recommend, for instance, as possible alternatives, so-called alternative remedies or complementary alternatives, either black cohosh, and I tend to recommend Meno herb, which you take once a day, or red clover isoflavone. And I recommend about 40 to 80 milligrams a day of that. Isoflavones are a sort of natural alternative to estrogens.
We've talked a lot about, the kind of physical symptoms, and we've touched on the mental aspects, the psychological. But I think, given the times that we live in now, this is hugely, we can't underestimate this, the pressures that we have already, and then, something that everyone is going through. I think it'd be great to hear from you, how we can deal with these types of things and recognize that it's very normal for this to happen, and that there is support out there. It'd be great to hear what advice you have for our women who particularly suffer with this.
One of the things I really want to get out there is that this is very real, because I have got really cross over the years over at how many, usually men, dare I say it, talk about the fact that actually it's nothing to do with hormones, that it's always, you're just going through the other stresses in your life. You've got the empty nest syndrome, your kids are leaving home, maybe your marriage isn't what it was, maybe you've realized that you're getting old. Actually, we've got really good evidence that both perimenopause and menopause can lead to mood swings, depression, anxiety, problems concentrating, sleep disturbance. So all of that, it's a really horrible combination. And what we don't want is people believing that they should just grow some moral fibre and get on with it. I think that's absolute nonsense. So about 80% of women are going to go through some hot flushes, but really, really importantly, you need to be aware that this is not your fault. I think that's the first thing to be aware of. You need to recognize that this may well be down to your hormones. And if you are menopausal and you're going through depressive symptoms, there's no obvious cause. It's really important to speak to your doctor about whether or not they think that, or whether they've thought of the menopause as being the cause for it, because we get a lot of women who perhaps don't think to mention it, don't talk to their doctor about it, go in with depressive symptoms. The doctor perhaps hasn't, it's not top of their mind, and they end up on antidepressants or being referred for counselling, when in fact what they may need is HRT. Now, we haven't talked much about HRT. There's been lots about risks and benefits, and there are some risks of HRT, particularly the kind that most women take, because if you haven't had a hysterectomy, you need to take a combination of estrogen and progesterone. But for most women, especially if you've got really bad symptoms at the menopause, it is the most effective way of relieving hot flushes, and it can have a huge impact on your concentration levels, your memory levels, your mood, and your hot flushes, night sweats, and vaginal dryness. However, what we do recommend is that you talk to your healthcare practitioner regularly about the risks and benefits for you.
I think that's perfect advice, and actually in real theme of how we're thinking about this, we've got to open up and talk about it. We've got to speak up about these issues. We have to support each other. We have to get education from these sources, because it's very normal. It's going to happen to all of us. Yeah. And I think, it's not all doom and gloom. I'm sure you've also heard from women who actually didn't have as many of the symptoms, but also sometimes find it quite liberating to go through this as well.
Yeah. But there's an awful lot of misinformation out there. So what I would really strongly say is, talk to your friends by all means, but don't necessarily believe the hype. One classic example is this so-called bioidentical HRT. These are only available privately. They're not recommended by NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Health and Care Excellence. They're not recommended by the British Medical Society, the British Menopause Society. And interestingly, NICE says the efficacy and safety of unregulated compounded bioidentical hormones are unknown, and yet there is so much out there on the internet. We will tailor a product for you. Actually, body identical HRT, which mimics your body's own natural hormones, is available widely through the NHS. Time was when the only kinds of HRT that were available were ones which were made from pregnant mare's urine. That is not the case anymore. There are very much body identical forms of HRT, and the modern forms may well have fewer risks. But also, really importantly, get reliable advice and don't believe people who go, oh, well, that was it, my life was over, I just had to go and sit by the fire, there's nothing you can do. There is.
That's a great way to end it. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here with us today, answering all of these questions. What a great wealth of information that we have now. And I think it's been really great to know that there is help out there, and there are things that can be done to help women through this phase of their life.
It's such a pleasure to be talking about it, to get the message out there for women to know that they are normal, and you know what? It's not all bad.
Exactly. Thank you so much.